From the earliest days of human society, most communities were relatively small and egalitarian, operating as ranked societies where leadership was limited and based largely on experience, age, or charisma rather than wealth or formal power. But as populations grew and resources became more centralized, certain individuals began to rise in status, taking on roles that would transform these simple societies into complex chiefdoms. In ranked societies, people shared resources collectively, and social distinctions were minimal. Leaders emerged informally, often based on their skills or wisdom, but they had little direct power to command others. Decisions were made collaboratively, and everyone played an important role in daily life, from gathering and hunting to organizing seasonal feasts. However, as groups settled into agricultural lifestyles, the need to organize labor, distribute resources, and manage conflict became more pressing, creating an opening for new forms of leadership. This shift marked the beginnings of chiefdoms. In a chiefdom, a single leader or a small elite group assumed control over the coordination of resources and labor. Chiefs, unlike leaders in ranked societies, wielded real power. They could command labor for large-scale agricultural projects, direct the construction of communal structures, and settle disputes. This role wasn't just about managing tasks. It required an ability to inspire loyalty and demonstrate authority, often through displays of wealth or ritual. Chiefs needed to be able to show that they could provide for their communities, either through successful harvests or through their control of trade and valuable resources. To maintain their authority, chiefs often centralized important resources, redistributing them to the community in ways that underscored their power and generosity. This practice, known as redistributive economy, involved collecting surplus goods from farmers or craftspeople and then redistributing these resources during feasts or community events. By giving back to the community, chiefs reinforced their status as providers, gaining loyalty and respect in return. Over time, this system created a dependency, as the community came to rely on the chief for access to resources and protection. With this growing reliance, chiefdoms began to show signs of early social stratification. Certain families, often related to the chief, held privileged positions within the community, overseeing trade, managing land, or leading religious rituals. These roles helped establish a distinct hierarchy, with the chief and their close kin at the top, controlling wealth and decision-making, while others worked as farmers, laborers, or artisans. This new social structure became a defining feature of chiefdoms, distinguishing them from the egalitarian systems that had come before. The rise of chiefdoms also saw the beginnings of labor specialization. As chiefs organized and mobilized communities for large projects, such as building ceremonial sites, managing irrigation, or creating trade networks, some people took on specific roles. Some became full-time artisans, crafting goods for trade, while others specialized in farming or administrative tasks. These roles not only contributed to the chiefdom's economy but also reinforced the hierarchy, as those closest to the chief often held the most influential or prestigious positions. This transition from ranked societies to chiefdoms was a turning point in human social organization. With each new layer of leadership, coordination, and hierarchy, these early societies were setting the stage for even greater levels of complexity. The development of chiefdoms laid the foundations for the rise of cities and states, as communities increasingly became defined by central authority, social stratification, and the collective power to organize and sustain large populations. One of the earliest signs of social complexity in the Old World emerged in the ancient settlement of Jericho, located in the Jordan Valley. By around 10,000 BCE, Jericho had grown into a sizable community with structures that reflected organized planning and collective labor. Surrounding this settlement, a massive stone wall and a tall tower rose, some of the earliest known examples of defensive architecture. These features suggest that Jericho's inhabitants had not only learned to mobilize labor on a large scale, but also likely had leaders or decision-makers coordinating efforts. Such constructions imply the presence of social hierarchy, as only a structured community could coordinate the resources and manpower needed to build them. Jericho's walls marked a significant development in early complex societies, organized defense, and the beginnings of urban life. Further to the north, in present-day Turkey, the settlement of Çatalhöyük flourished around 7,500 BCE. Çatalhöyük was an extensive town of interconnected homes, with no clear streets separating them. Residents moved across rooftops to access different parts of the settlement. Inside, the walls of homes were painted with murals and adorned with symbols, suggesting a community with a rich ritual and artistic life. Certain buildings were decorated with elaborate shrines and animal skulls, indicating spaces that may have been reserved for religious or communal gatherings. While Çatalhöyük lacked the formal hierarchy seen in later societies, its organization and shared symbolic practices hint at emerging social roles and possible religious leadership, laying a foundation for the religious and cultural complexity that would later define ancient civilizations. In Mesopotamia, the world's earliest cities took shape along the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. By around 3,500 BCE, this region was home to complex societies with organized governments, specialized labor, and intricate irrigation systems that allowed large populations to thrive. The city of Uruk, often considered the world's first true city, was a center of innovation and administration. At its core was a large temple complex dedicated to Inanna, the goddess of love and war, a structure that dominated the landscape and required extensive labor to build and maintain. The temples not only served religious purposes but also acted as centers of economic and political power, controlling surplus grain, managing trade, and organizing labor. In these cities, priests and officials emerged as a distinct ruling class, overseeing both spiritual and secular affairs. This dual role of the temple in Mesopotamian cities illustrated the interconnectedness of religion, politics, and economy in early urban societies. Egypt followed a similar path toward complexity, though on a grander and more centralized scale. The Nile River, with its predictable flooding, allowed for prosperous agriculture that supported large, stable populations. By around 3,100 BCE, Egypt had unified into a powerful kingdom under the rule of a single pharaoh, establishing one of history's first nation-states. Pharaohs were seen not only as rulers but as divine figures, gods on earth who commanded obedience and loyalty. Under their authority, monumental projects like the pyramids were undertaken, symbols of power and divine connection that required the coordinated labor of thousands. Egypt's centralized system allowed for immense control over resources, labor, and land, illustrating a level of social organization and hierarchy that would influence the development of complex societies across the Mediterranean and beyond. Across the Mediterranean, early complex societies emerged with their own distinct structures and innovations. In the Aegean, the Minoan civilization on Crete flourished around 2000 BCE, marked by elaborate palaces, advanced artwork, and intricate trade networks. The Palace of Knossos, with its labyrinthine design, storerooms, and ritual spaces, served as the heart of Minoan society. Minoan civilization was heavily influenced by trade, as the island's central location connected it with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other cultures, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and artistic styles. Minoan society appeared to lack the rigid hierarchy of Mesopotamia or Egypt. However, their highly organized administration and complex economic activities suggested a sophisticated, cooperative structure that managed resources and maintained their vibrant culture. The Old World's path to complexity was not a single, unified journey but a mosaic of cultural, environmental, and social factors that shaped each region uniquely. From fortified towns like Jericho to the religious and political centers of Uruk and the Grand Kingdoms of Egypt, each society developed its own way of organizing people, managing resources, and expressing their beliefs. These early complex societies established the foundations of the modern world, showing the versatility and innovation of human communities, adapting to challenges and opportunities across varied landscapes. In the New World, the rise of complex societies paralleled developments in the Old World, but followed unique trajectories influenced by the distinctive landscapes and resources of the Americas. One of the earliest and most influential of these societies was the Olmec civilization, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica. Emerging around 1200 BCE along the Gulf Coast in present-day Mexico, the Olmecs built large ceremonial centers, including San Lorenzo and La Venta, which featured monumental stone heads, altars, and intricately designed pyramids. These colossal stone heads, each carved to represent distinct facial features, may have depicted Olmec rulers, underscoring the presence of social stratification and leadership. The Olmecs also established extensive trade networks that spanned Mesoamerica, moving obsidian, jade, and pottery across long distances. This trade facilitated the spread of Olmec influence, as well as their art styles, religious symbols, and architectural techniques, setting cultural foundations for future civilizations like the Maya and the Aztecs. Further south, in the Andean region of South America, complex societies developed around challenging mountain landscapes. By 3000 BCE, coastal and highland communities in modern-day Peru had begun to establish early ceremonial and trade centers, creating the foundations of Andean civilization. One of the earliest and most influential sites was Caral, situated in the Supe Valley. Caral featured massive pyramid structures, circular plazas, and residential complexes, suggesting a highly organized society capable of mobilizing labor for large-scale construction. The residents of Caral cultivated cotton, which they used for fishing nets and textiles, trading these goods with coastal communities. Caral's influence extended up and down the Andean coast, illustrating an early network of social and economic connections. This tradition of monumentality and regional exchange laid the groundwork for later Andean societies, particularly the Inca, who would eventually unify much of the Andean region. In North America, complex societies also took root, with distinct cultural and architectural developments. In the Mississippi River Valley, the construction of massive earthworks and mounds around 1000 CE marked the rise of the Mississippian culture, centered around cities like Cahokia. Cahokia, located near modern-day St. Louis, was the largest and most complex pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. At its peak, Cahokia had a population of up to 20,000 people, with a central plaza surrounded by massive platform mounds, including the towering Monk's Mound, which stood over 100 feet high. These mounds served as ceremonial centers and the residences of elite rulers, indicating a stratified society. Cahokia's influence spread across the Mississippi Valley, and its people engaged in long-distance trade, exchanging shells, copper, and other goods. This extensive trade network connected Cahokia with distant regions and helped spread Mississippian culture throughout the eastern United States. Another North American society that demonstrated complexity was the ancestral Puebloans in the Southwest. By around 750 CE, the ancestral Puebloans were constructing multi-storied stone and adobe buildings, known as pueblos, within cliff walls and canyon floors. Sites like Chaco Canyon in present-day New Mexico became major centers of ancestral Puebloan culture, with massive structures, kivas, ceremonial rooms, and sophisticated road systems radiating from the canyon. Chaco Canyon was likely a ceremonial and trade hub, connecting smaller settlements across the Four Corners region. The ancestral Puebloans cultivated maize, beans, and squash, adapting their farming practices to the arid landscape through the use of irrigation and water conservation techniques. Their road systems and trade networks linked Chaco with other southwestern communities, spreading cultural ideas and religious practices across the region. In Central America, the Maya civilization flourished across the Yucatan Peninsula, developing one of the most advanced cultures in the ancient New World. By 250 CE, the Maya had built city-states like Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, which featured towering pyramids, intricately carved stelae, and palatial structures. Maya cities were not united under a single empire but operated as independent centers, each ruled by its own elite class. These city-states were linked by a shared culture and language, as well as trade networks that exchanged jade, obsidian, cacao, and other valuable goods. The Maya are especially noted for their achievements in astronomy, mathematics, and writing. They created a sophisticated calendar system and were among the only societies in the New World to develop a written language. Their detailed records and astronomical observations reflect a society deeply invested in both spiritual and scientific knowledge, governed by priest-kings who were believed to bridge the human and divine realms. Across the New World, these societies developed forms of social organization, monumental architecture, and trade that reflected their unique environments and cultures. From the Olmec ceremonial centers and the monumental mounds of Cahokia to the intricate city-states of the Maya and the vast networks of the Andean civilizations, the peoples of the Americas built complex societies that rivaled those of the Old World in innovation, diversity, and cultural depth. Agriculture was a transformative force that reshaped human societies, serving as the foundation upon which complex social structures were built. As people transitioned from hunting and gathering to cultivating crops and domesticating animals, they began to settle in larger communities. This shift created a more stable food supply, allowing populations to grow, which in turn led to the formation of villages and eventually cities. With the rise of agriculture, societies had a surplus of food for the first time in human history, a surplus that brought about profound changes in social organization, economic roles, and power dynamics. The ability to produce food surpluses meant that not everyone needed to be directly involved in food production. For the first time, some individuals could specialize in other activities, craftsmanship, trade, construction, and religious roles. Artisans created pottery, tools, and textiles, while traders facilitated the exchange of goods, linking communities and spreading ideas. This specialization laid the groundwork for social stratification, as certain skills and roles gained higher status within the community. Those who could control and distribute resources, such as food and valuable goods, gradually accumulated power and influence, setting themselves apart from others. Agriculture also required organized systems of labor to manage fields, irrigation, and harvests effectively. The construction of irrigation canals, storage facilities, and later monumental buildings, like temples and administrative centers, demanded coordinated efforts beyond the family unit. This need for large-scale cooperation led to the development of social hierarchies, as leaders emerged to oversee these projects and manage resources. These leaders, who often held both political and religious authority, reinforced their positions by controlling surplus food supplies, which they could distribute in times of need or use to secure loyalty from the community. Religious institutions and leaders often played a critical role in this growing social complexity. With the stability that agriculture provided, spiritual practices became more elaborate, often intertwining with the cycles of planting and harvest. Religious rituals and festivals were timed with agricultural cycles, celebrating the fertility of the land and invoking blessings for abundant harvests. Priests and religious elites became influential figures, controlling the ritual knowledge needed to ensure successful crops. In many societies, temples became both spiritual and administrative centers, where religious leaders could oversee the storage of surplus food, manage labor for temple upkeep, and make decisions that affected the entire community. Trade also flourished as agricultural communities grew, connecting distant regions and facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices. Agricultural societies often traded surplus food, along with specialized products like pottery, textiles, and crafted goods. These trade networks linked communities over vast distances, spreading innovations and establishing relationships between groups. Societies that controlled valuable resources, such as fertile land or access to rare materials, gained influence, creating regional hubs of power and wealth. As agricultural societies grew, they also began to formalize systems of law and governance to manage the complexities of their larger, more diverse populations. The surplus provided by agriculture required careful management to ensure fair distribution, prevent conflicts, and maintain order. Leaders implemented rules for land ownership, inheritance, and trade, creating systems that regulated behavior and protected resources. These rules further solidified the roles of elites and leaders, who could enforce laws, manage disputes, and allocate resources, cementing their authority within the society. The influence of agriculture on social complexity is evident across early civilizations. In Mesopotamia, irrigation, and surplus grain production supported the rise of powerful city-states, each with its own temple and ruling elite. In Egypt, the Nile's predictable flooding enabled large-scale agriculture, which in turn supported a centralized state ruled by a divine pharaoh. And in Mesoamerica, maize cultivation allowed communities to grow and develop into complex societies with distinct social roles, trade networks, and monumental architecture. Agriculture was more than just a means of sustenance. It was the foundation upon which the structures of organized society, power, and culture were built. The origins of social complexity have long been the subject of debate among historians and archaeologists, with several theories proposed to explain why early societies developed hierarchies, specialized roles, and structured systems of governance. Two major models, often called the conflict model and the integration model, offer contrasting explanations for the emergence of complex social structures. The conflict model suggests that social complexity arose from competition and resource control. According to this perspective, as populations grew and resources became scarcer, communities experienced conflicts over access to land, water, and other essential resources. In this scenario, leaders emerged as powerful figures who could manage and protect these resources, often through force or strategic alliances. Over time, these leaders established authority over others, creating social hierarchies in which power was concentrated among a few. This model proposes that inequality was a necessary mechanism for maintaining order and control, with elites managing the community's access to resources, settling disputes, and organizing defensive strategies against rival groups. The conflict model also implies that early complex societies were built on the unequal distribution of resources, with elites using their power to exploit labor, control trade, and collect taxes or tributes. In Mesopotamia, for instance, the rise of city-states involved leaders who controlled surplus grain stores and directed the construction of temples and city walls. These leaders were able to consolidate their power through both military and religious authority, establishing structures that kept commoners dependent on them for protection and access to resources. This model views social complexity as a system imposed by elites to maintain their control, often to the benefit of a small ruling class at the expense of the broader community. On the other hand, the integration model offers a more cooperative view, proposing that social complexity emerged from the need to manage interdependent relationships and solve collective challenges. According to this theory, as societies grew and required more organized labor for agriculture, trade, and construction, leaders emerged not to dominate, but to coordinate. In this view, leaders and elites played a unifying role, organizing resources and labor to benefit the entire community. The integration model suggests that social hierarchy was seen as a way to create stability and efficiency, as leaders took on roles in managing irrigation, storage, and resource distribution that were too complex for small, decentralized groups to handle. The integration model emphasizes the benefits that social complexity brought to early communities. By establishing leadership roles and specialized labor, these societies could accomplish ambitious projects that required a high degree of organization, such as building monumental architecture or constructing large irrigation systems. In ancient Egypt, for example, the pharaoh and his administration managed the annual flooding of the Nile, a natural event that required careful planning to ensure productive harvests. Rather than exploiting their power, pharaohs and officials were seen as essential figures in maintaining agricultural prosperity and societal harmony. Some scholars combine elements of both models, recognizing that complexity likely arose from both cooperation and competition. In many cases, early leaders may have gained authority through their abilities to solve communal challenges, but then used that power to secure personal wealth and influence, creating systems that were both beneficial and exploitative. This blend of integration and conflict suggests that early societies were dynamic, with leaders and elites walking a fine line between unifying communities and maintaining control over them. These debates also raise questions about the role of environmental pressures and external influences. In regions with abundant resources, social complexity may have arisen more peacefully, with leadership roles gradually developing as communities work together to maximize their wealth. In areas with harsher environments or higher population densities, the need to control limited resources may have led to more rigid hierarchies and a concentration of power. Factors like climate, trade opportunities, and interactions with neighboring societies could all have shaped the ways in which social complexity unfolded. Ultimately, the origins of social complexity were likely shaped by a combination of factors: competition, cooperation, environmental pressures, and human adaptability. These different paths to complexity remind us that early societies were not monolithic. They were dynamic and responsive to the unique challenges and opportunities of their environments. Whether through conflict, cooperation, or a mix of both, they set the stage for the intricate social systems that would define human civilization. Monumental architecture stands as one of the clearest indicators of social complexity and power in ancient societies. Across cultures, these grand structures, temples, pyramids, palaces, and tombs, were more than just functional spaces. They were symbols of authority, control, and often, divine connection. The construction of monumental architecture required immense resources, labor, and coordination, all of which reflected the ability of a ruling elite to mobilize and direct the community's efforts for shared, and often symbolic, purposes. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurats served as some of the earliest examples of monumental architecture and stood at the heart of city-states like Ur and Uruk. These massive, multi-level temples were dedicated to the gods, and their size and visibility underscored the close connection between religious authority and political power. The ziggurats were not just places of worship, they functioned as centers of economic and social control, where priests and officials managed trade, stored surplus grain, and distributed resources. Building and maintaining these towering structures required organized labor, and only a strong leadership with centralized authority could command such resources. By elevating religious structures to such prominence, the elites reinforced their role as intermediaries between the people and the gods, justifying their control as both a spiritual and a societal necessity. In ancient Egypt, the pyramids stand as some of the most iconic examples of monumental architecture, constructed as elaborate tombs for pharaohs who were considered divine. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu, is a testament to the immense power of the Egyptian state and its rulers. The construction of this colossal structure required an estimated workforce of tens of thousands, including skilled laborers, architects, and logistics managers, all coordinated by the state. The pyramid not only served as a burial site, but also symbolized the pharaoh's godlike status and ensured his presence in the afterlife. By building structures that could endure for millennia, Egyptian rulers emphasized their eternal connection to both the divine and the earthly realms, reinforcing their central role in society. The sheer scale of these projects communicated the state's power and resources to the people, and by commanding such monumental labor, the pharaohs legitimized their rule as both absolute and divinely sanctioned. The Maya civilization also constructed monumental architecture that reflected their rulers' power and their connection to the gods. At sites like Tikal and Copan, towering pyramids and ceremonial plazas dominated the landscape, designed for religious rituals and public gatherings. The Maya built pyramids topped with temples where rulers performed sacred rites, connecting their political power with the divine. These structures were often inscribed with elaborate carvings and hieroglyphs depicting rulers' lineages and accomplishments, celebrating their legitimacy and linking them to both earthly and supernatural realms. The construction of such temples required coordinated labor and resources, which the Maya rulers commanded. In doing so, they reinforced their authority and displayed their capacity to bring their communities together for shared, monumental achievements. In the Andes, the Inca civilization used monumental architecture to communicate their dominance and organizational prowess. The city of Cusco, designed as the empire's capital, was constructed in a layout that symbolized its status as the navel of the world. Massive stone buildings, such as the Coricancha Temple, demonstrated the Incas' advanced engineering skills and ability to mobilize a vast labor force. The Coricancha, dedicated to Inti, the sun god, was plated in gold, reflecting the divine status of the Incan rulers who claimed to be descendants of Inti himself. This complex served not only as a spiritual center but also as an administrative hub, where the Inca elite managed the empire's vast territories. Through structures like Coricancha, the Incas asserted their rulers' semi-divine status, projecting power and unity across the diverse regions under their control. In the North American Midwest, the Mississippian culture built monumental earthen mounds that signaled the power of their leaders and the complex organization of their society. At Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, the largest of these mounds, Monk's Mound, was the focal point of the settlement. Standing over 100 feet tall, Monk's Mound served as a platform for the chief's residence or temple, elevating the leader both physically and symbolically above the rest of the community. Surrounding the mounds were large plazas used for ceremonies, feasts, and public gatherings, which reinforced social unity and highlighted the chief's role in society. The construction of such massive mounds required coordinated labor, showing the ability of Cahokia's leaders to mobilize and direct their people's efforts for shared, symbolic purposes. In this way, the Mississippian mounds were more than earthworks. They were expressions of power, symbols of authority, and markers of social hierarchy. Across these ancient cultures, monumental architecture served as a powerful, visible statement of leadership and control. Each stone laid, each mound raised, and each temple built was a reflection of a society's ability to organize, a leader's capacity to command, and a community's willingness to invest in collective symbols of identity and power. These monumental structures endure as legacies of the leaders who built them and the communities that supported them, marking the birth of complex societies that left their indelible mark on history. We'd love to hear your thoughts on possible future topics. What areas of human evolution would you like to explore next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. As always, our references and further reading are listed in the description below if you'd like to dive deeper into the subject. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode. And do not forget, subscribe to The Knowledge.